Welcome to the Passive Income Machine podcast, where we show you how to break free from the grind and achieve real financial freedom in 10 years or less. My name is Ryan D. Lee, and I've helped thousands turn income into cash flow, trade fake money for real assets, and take back control over their time, their wealth, and ultimately their life. Each week, you'll get strategy, tools, and mindset to build your own passive income machine. So my friends, sit back, relax, and enjoy today's episode. All right, my friends. Welcome back to the Passive Income Machine podcast. You are on the microphone today with me, Ryan Lee, and the Scott Saunders. I'm gonna have to start coming up with some really good nicknames for Scott Saunders. So I could go the Scott Saunders, the man, the myth, and the legend, or the Scott Saunders, the tax legionnaire. I don't know. We'll have to come up with something cool. But what's up, Scott? You ready to talk today?
I am ready. It's always great to talk with you. It's great to talk about finances and get people educated on things they maybe haven't considered or thought before. So let's dig into this.
So Scott, you and I are both parents, right? And your kids are a little bit older than my kids, but my kids are getting to the point where they're starting to ask some interesting questions. My oldest son is 19. He worked his first full-time job this summer, and it was fun to watch as a dad. You know, he did something he loved. He loves doing woodworking, and he was making cabinets. And he made some cabinets for some of the wealthiest homes in Utah. He worked at a very high-end cabinetry shop, but he got paid $15 an hour. And getting paid $15 an hour while living here at the house, he barely had enough to fund his gas to and from work, to get a couple, meals on the weekend, and maybe take a girl out every now and again. And he's been asking me questions. He's like, "Dad, how do I do this? Like, what? I mean, this is a good job. I was excited. $15 an hour sounded like a lot of money, but man, how do I afford life today?" Scott, what are your kids saying about how expensive life seems to be for this new generation coming in?
I get very similar to that. My kids are in their 20s, and I get kind of a different flavor. They'll actually shoot over to me an Instagram video or a TikTok, and they'll show me, "Hey, Dad, you had it really easy. Here's what the dollar was back in your day. Here's what minimum wage was. Here's what a house costs. Here's what a car costs. And by the way, here's what it costs now." And they'll actually point it out to me, and they'll go, "Dad, it was so easy for you." And, first, of course, I kind of do the knee-jerk reaction, which is, well, it really wasn't easy then, right? It still took discipline, and I had to be smart about it. But at the same time, all three of my kids have been sending me this. I think there's a common thread that runs through it, and there's truth in what they're saying. They're sharing truth, and I think they're trying to alert me and saying, "Hey, it's really harder for me now than it was for you. It might have been hard for you, but it's even harder." And I'm coming around where I'm really appreciating how challenging it is and starting to look at life through their lens and going, wow, it feels kind of daunting. How do I ever get ahead not having much left after I pay for all this stuff that I need to live?
Man, I 100% agree. I'm always a believer in hard work. I believe you can outwork almost any problem that's thrown at you in life. One of the questions that Beth and I have constantly asked ourselves is did we give our kids too good of an upbringing? Like, did we give them too much? Do they know how to work? Are they going to fall flat on their face? But if we really start to put some numbers to the equation that our kids are facing versus the equation that we faced, it is different. I mean, I remember when I graduated college, Scott, my salary out of college was $32,000 a year. And man, I remember looking at that first paycheck and I'm like, this is crazy. A college degree only earns me this. But Beth and I, we lived in an apartment for about 2 years, and man, we saved like crazy. I mean, we scrimped, every penny was accounted for. And after 2 years, we had enough money to put a down payment to buy our first house. But today, that's different. So 40 years ago, the median home price, now I'm not this old, but let's go back to the 1980s, because 40 years ago, the median home price in the U.S. was $47,000, while the median household income was $17,700. So the average home cost about 2.6 times more than the average income. Today, this is where our kids have a point. The median home price today is closer to $400,000, but the median income is around $75,000. That's 5.3 times the annual income is now the home price. So there has been something happening in the last 40 years that does mathematically make it harder for our kids. What is that in your opinion?
In my opinion, I think it's really simple and it's kind of tragic. And it all comes down to this thing we carry on our wallet called a dollar. That dollar doesn't buy as much as it used to. That dollar just doesn't have as much purchasing power. And I think that's what we're seeing. And then that shows up in all sorts of things like asset prices that are a lot higher than wages are. But I think that's kind of the root problem is that dollar now, the purchasing power of it from the 80s to today, it's gone down a lot. I don't even know how much, but probably cut in half easily. And the worst part about it, we're sitting here 2025, that trajectory of the purchasing power, getting less and less, it's accelerating. We're in a situation where not only are we facing this headwind, but the headwind's getting worse and worse and worse.
So inflation is driving up the cost, the purchase price of assets, but wages, real wages, they've not kept up. I mean, that's kind of what that delta is showing us is real wages have not kept up with inflation, but at the same time, inflation is driving up the price of dollars. And since 1971 to today, the US dollar has lost 85% of its purchasing power. Where on the flip side, and this is how we can start to kind of correlate and map out what's going on in our economy today, because on the flip side, asset prices have gone up. In fact, if we now equate the home price to real asset prices, it's cheaper if you bought an asset in it's cheaper to buy a house if you bought in other forms of assets versus trying to use the dollar. So let me throw this at you and get your feedback on it. So gold in 1980. The median, so if we measured it in gold, okay, if we measured buying a house in gold, in the U.S., it would cost about 600 ounces of gold to buy a median price home. Today, if we bought in gold, it would only cost us 200 ounces to buy the same median price home. Oil, another commodity, in 1980, it took about 15,000 barrels to buy a house, a median cost house in 1980. Today, it would only cost 6,000 barrels to buy the same median price house. And Bitcoin, this is where it gets really crazy. Bitcoin wasn't around in the 80s, but if we want to look at Bitcoin, in 2012, the median home price house would be $400,000 Bitcoin, but today it would only cost 6 Bitcoin to buy a median purchase price home. So assets that aren't linked to the dollar, those assets, they've been holding value and they've been actually going up in value. And, when we try to buy a commodity like a home, it's actually cheaper to buy a home, which that's what you would expect. Innovation should be driving down the cost. It should be deflating the price. But because of inflation, it distorts everything in our economy. Break that down for us, Scott.
Well, what I think you're showing there is the importance of having other assets, not using the measuring stick being the US dollar. So the one you had on gold was amazing. A house is actually cheaper. It's 1/3 the cost today in gold compared to what it was then. So you've got to look at the measuring stick. And I think the reality is in America, we look at dollars. We carry dollars. I notice when I travel, people measure things in euros and all these other denominations. Other countries are really good at converting currency, and they kind of do that. They're used to it because they've lived next to one another, and they convert it. In America, because we have the dollar status as kind of a premium one, we're the dollar standard around the globe after Bretton Woods, we live in a world where we measure everything in the dollar. And so our benchmark is the US dollar. The reality is that's not the best benchmark at all. So I think people would be shocked to think, wait a minute, houses are actually cheap if we actually measured them in these other things, right? Bitcoin, oil, and gold. That's almost counterintuitive, right? Which kind of drives the question then, where should we be investing our money, right? We've got these assets that are out there. Should we be holding on to dollars, or should we be holding on to all these other things that seem to be a pretty darn good store? I go as far as to saying a great store of value, just
100%.
looking at a history. Yeah.
And just looking at the what we just shared, these stats. So you and I both know Kiyosaki, right? Kiyosaki wrote the foreword to the book. You've spent some time with Kiyosaki. And I think Kiyosaki, his words, his writings, his books have been one of the greatest influences on my perception of money. He wrote a book, I don't think it got as much prestige as many of his other books, but he wrote a book called Fake. And I don't know, this was probably 4, 5, 6, 7 years ago. And the whole book was a pretty thick book, but it was all the things that are misperceptions, misunderstandings, or are fake in our economy today. And his biggest, argument was the dollar is fake, right? It's based on perception, and because of inflation, the government is destroying the dollar. It's just a piece of paper, it's an IOU, but it's backed by nothing. It is legitimately fake. And my biggest takeaway from reading his book was it's hard not to read his book and read what's in there and not just be mad at the system. And that's always my first reaction when I understand what's going on with our financial system. I want to go punch something, right? Usually, if I could, maybe the Federal Reserve or the government or somebody's got to get punched, but not punching anyone. My next reaction when I calm down is I say, okay, cool. Now that I know this, how can I use this to my advantage? And I think my biggest takeaway from all of this and from that book was the playbook, if we want to make it as simple as possible, is to convert fake dollars, which there's no counter argument to it. If you're measuring your wealth in dollars, you're getting poor. So convert fake dollars to real assets. Then the entire game boils down to, well, what is a real asset? And if we can start to understand that single phrase, convert fake dollars into real assets, then the entire game of money changes. We change the measuring stick, and we actually change our wealth equation because of it. Hey, quick break in the content. I hope you're enjoying and fired up about what you're learning here, because if you are, the How to Retire in 10 Years Summit is the next logical step. This event is where the magic really happens, where financial freedom moves from a dream into reality right this year in 2025. Early bird registration is open, and trust me, you want the exclusive bonuses that we're offering right now. It won't last, so hit the link in the description or just head over to retireintenyears.com and save your spot. I'll see you on the inside, and back to the show. Give me your thoughts on that, Scott.
I think converting to assets is the critical piece, right? That's what it is. And the fake dollar is really what it is. You want to do that, and the faster you can accumulate the assets and start picking those up, the more financial security you have, because now you're invested in something that is at least going to stay even, or maybe even be in a better position. But that's a different way of thinking about it, because we tend to, how many people look at their financial statements, right? They look at a number on a 401k or a stock, and it's got X with some zeros behind it, and we feel good because it feels like a big number. The reality is that number really doesn't have any bearing in life. What matters is our purchasing power. Yeah. And these real assets are what help preserve our purchasing power. So that's what I love about what you're sharing, is converting that and really picking up the purchasing power and retaining it, and then building kind of a whole stable of those. And you can talk about different ones. There are a lot of different assets that are out there. And we're in an interesting world, right? You got real assets, you got commodities, you got real estate, and you've even got these digital assets that are starting to pick up steam and have potential. So there's a whole play field there of options to look at. And pretty much any one of those is going to be better than holding a US dollar.
So let's actually go one level deeper on this, because I've been putting some thought into this, and I'd love to get your opinion, your thoughts on this. As I've been looking, you recommended a book to me that has kind of been bending my brain. I've read it twice, and I haven't done that in a long time. I read the book, and I immediately started right back from the beginning and read it all the way through again. And so it was The Big Prince, and it was really going through the history of our monetary system to help us understand the history, so we can make better decisions in the present based on where we're going forward. And I would recommend that book. In fact, we're gonna work on getting that author into our world. Phenomenal book. But now, as we come back to a playbook, how do I translate all of this into my life? I think one of the biggest challenges that people have is understanding what a real asset is. And then when we kind of put this into the framework of financial planning or retirement planning, to make it simple, how do we buy a real asset that can pay us in what the currency is today, which is a dollar? And I think one of the most powerful things you can think about when you're considering an asset as part of your retirement plan is, how do you buy an asset that you can leverage without liquidating the asset, that can give you a stream of cash, literal US dollars, so you can fund your lifestyle? If you can get those two things down, if I can own an asset and either use financing to leverage the value of that asset, if I own a rental property that kicks out rental income, I don't have to sell the asset, but I have cash dollars coming in. If I have a life insurance policy, I can own the asset, take loans against it, and have cash dollars to spend. Or even cryptocurrency. There are some now ways to leverage a cryptocurrency without selling the asset. And so if we look at this across the board, What are your thoughts on how do we take this concept of a real asset that rises in value or at least maintains its value as the dollar loses value? How do we get real assets that can also give us a real cash stream of income without having to liquidate the asset?
Yeah, I think what you brought is really key. One way of doing that is we're going to use the bank's money and use some leverage, positive leverage, to pick up the asset. So instead of just getting an asset dollar for dollar, we'll get it with a multiple many times. So we can pick up a bigger asset. Because then this whole thing about inflation, it also is going to devalue that debt that we used to buy the asset. And I think what you brought up is super key. I think a lot of people, even myself when I was younger, thought, you look at a stock that goes up and it makes money and you sell it and you do something. The wealthy do something very different. They acquire an asset that kicks off streams of cash. They keep the asset. They never let go of that nest egg. And then they take those streams of cash and they buy another one of some site that does the same thing. And then they start stacking up assets. So they never actually sell the assets. They never liquidate them. They never sell them off. They keep using them, taking the income stream, then buying another asset, maybe borrowing against it, whatever it is. But it's a combination where now they're building up a little war chest of assets that give them options. And each asset allows them to accelerate the acquisition of another asset. So it's one of these things that once you start playing that game, it starts to steamroll in a really positive direction because one asset leads to buying another asset, which leads to another asset. And it's a totally different way of looking at it. Most of America thinks I buy X stock, I bought it low, I sell it high, I pay all my taxes, and I made a little money. But they're not actually creating an asset. They're just doing a transaction there, paying the government a big piece along the way. And then that asset, what is they deploy it in? They a lot of times will go back and buy another stock and do it over and over. And it's just a different way of looking at it. But that way rarely leads to building a base of assets. It just doesn't get the job done. And you're always chasing the next return. So you never get a sense where you can sit back. I mean, what do we want, Ryan? We want to sit back. We want to have our assets working for us where we can sit back and relax and go, okay, I build up a little base. We don't want to always. I don't want to be chasing another deal every year of my life, looking for another home run. That gets a little old at a certain point in time.
Well, totally. And I think that's if we really want to look at it and break down the biggest challenge with traditional, conventional financial planning, it's the idea that we don't hold assets, right? I mean, the idea of a 401k or a market-based portfolio is build up a net worth and then slowly liquidate that net worth in the right order, the right sequence, the right timing, and try to get to the point where you don't run out of money before you run out of time. That's a very challenging thing to do because there's so much out of your control. And the only way to really regulate that is take as little money out of your portfolio as you possibly can to give you the longevity to where you don't drain your portfolio dry. But there's no mention whatsoever of owning an asset and holding it. It's owning a commodity. And I guess we could consider the stock market in some form or fashion a form of an asset. But it is, man, in fact, that would be a whole nother podcast. We really do need to define what an asset is. But at the bottom line, when you hold an asset that can generate income without liquidating the asset from a tax perspective, from a wealth perspective, you end up so much further ahead. And Scott, to end this, this week we had two people in our community, a couple post in our community, and I love this. I think the number one thing I hear from people is, I wish I would have started earlier. I wish I would have known. I wish I would have, known about this in my 20s. Can you imagine where I'd be today? Because most of the people that come into our world, they're in their 40s, maybe even their 50s. They've done what they were told to do for 20, 30 years, realizing it's nowhere near enough, and now they're looking for a different way. But we've got the Stewarts down in Arizona, and they came into our community probably 6-7 years ago, and they've totally radically altered the way they're building wealth. Not only are they building wealth for themselves, they've been teaching their kids. And their son, I believe he's their oldest son, he got married a couple of years ago, and him and his wife, Austin and Amy, they posted in our community, not Austin, Amy, Austin and Spring, I'm sorry. Spring's 25th birthday was this last week. So she's 25, and they were holding a picture of their third asset, their third rental property that they've acquired in their 20s. Scott, what's going on? I mean, that's wealth right there. Can you imagine having an asset in your 20s that's going to compound, either that asset or using 1031s for the rest of your life and generate income for the rest of your life? That's wealth.
It almost blows my mind. I talked to him when I was in Dallas a few weeks ago, and I said, "You're doing all the right things." They bought, and the cool thing about that post, they had a big picture of them smiling. They're about to give birth to their first child within the next few weeks, and they both had big smiles, and they're showing this beautiful asset that they picked up. I explained to him, I said, if you guys stay on this path, you understand that if you're in your mid 20s, in your mid 30s, you're going to have options that you can't even imagine. I go, honestly, it's going to blow your mind. Stay the course. You're going to have so many options because of what you're doing. He's like, I know it. There's nothing more rewarding. I'm sure you have the same feeling of seeing that couple getting after it when they're young and realizing their future and their trajectory for their family and for both of them as a couple. It is going to be unbelievable. And it's all because they decided to kind of optimize and do some things that are maybe a little different than their peers. And they've been chunking away at it. 3 assets. I mean, most people are saving to buy their first home, and they've got their third income producing asset. And they're using a vault strategy, and they're using the tax code.
Yeah.
Come on. That's awesome.
I tell you what, so kind of ending this where we started it. If you're a parent listening to this podcast, your kids are struggling. There's no doubt around it. We are giving our kids. I feel so motivated as a producer right now to educate, to train, to fight the system, to be a light of what's possible, because I truly believe we're probably the first generation in a long time to leave a world worse than we found it to our kids. That's whether we made the decisions or not. No doubt we're leaving a world worse than we found it to our kids. And so it's our obligation and our stewardship to be a light, to be an example, to show our kids what's possible with our actions and to help raise their financial intelligence. Austin and Spring are a phenomenal example of following the steps of their parents who were raised in the system to do everything traditionally. They realized it wasn't working. They changed it for themselves, and then they paid it forward so their kids start off on a better foot than they did. So my friends, that's real financial education. Putting financial education in place to use the economic forces to your advantage rather than being a victim of them. Inflation is destroying your dollar, period. Understand what a real asset is and learn how to convert fake dollars into real assets. And with that being said, Scott, we'll sign off today and join us on the next podcast. We'll see you guys. All right, my friends, that's a wrap for today. If you're serious, though, about turning everything we talked about into your new reality, there's only one place you need to be. It's the How to Retire in 10 Years Summit. This is your chance to learn exactly how to unlock financial freedom and build passive income in 2025. Early registration is live right now with an exclusive bonus for our early action takers. Don't miss out. Head to the link in the show notes or just head on over to retireintenyears.com and I'll catch you at the summit.